Breaking it down in layman's terms today, we're talking about career transformation, career transition, and a whole lot more. I got a distinct author, a man of many careers, a man of many jobs, and he's sharing his book today, Off the Top Rope. We got author, educator, compliance officer, master's degree, doctorate degree, all kinds of degrees. Wes Rhea, and of course, a professional wrestler. Welcome in layman's terms.
Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that. And yeah, make sure people understand former professional wrestler. That's way, don't want to be doing that anymore to stay in time. But no, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. So hopefully my goal is to hopefully help somebody. That's what I'm shooting for.
Well, in the premise of the book and our conversations that we've had, and I've listened to other interviews, is that the premise is, you want to help people. You want to help people sharing your own stories and your own journey. And the title of the book that we're really going to lean into is Off the Top Rope, From Professional Wrestler to the Corporate World and to the Classroom, a journey in faith, career transition, and a little bit of luck. You cover all that and so much more in the book. And I got a copy of the book last week when I actually met you. Well, I've met you a couple of times, but showed up at your book signing, for the book. And the book's been around for a couple of years now?
Yeah, not quite 2, but yeah, right about 2. Yeah, you got it. Yep. Yeah. I think it went out in early, they kind of pre-released it in early 2023, March, April 2023. So we're about 2, a little over 2 years now. Yeah, fully out.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed it. And I've had it for a week and I read it cover to cover. And
well, I appreciate that.
And so just to prove to our audience, I got a personally signed by Wes at the Barnes and Noble, signed copy. So legitimate.
That'll add a couple bucks to it, right?
Exactly. But let's chop it up a little bit. Obviously, you've had a lot of titles, and I'm just going to ramble off a few more just so a little clarity.
Sure.
Professional wrestler, and then you've been a chief information officer. You've worked in healthcare industry, currently do that now. Finance. You've done telecommunications, customer service. Education's a big part of your background, as well as giving back to Kennesaw State, where it all started at. I mean, you've been coaching the undergraduates, you've been coaching careers, but you've been educating at all levels. So all these careers have been a part of your journeys. Growing up in Marietta, you've always had a passion for sports, and you graduated and you leaned into a profession that is professional wrestling. And I find that truly fascinating, and how did that come to be?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one, Doug. When I look back, I was, as you mentioned, I was very athletic, and growing up, love sports, and when I was growing up, people as a kid, people would ask somebody, what do you want to be when you grow up? And a lot of, kids would be like, I want to be a fireman or a firefighter or lawyer or a doctor or, something like that, truck driver. And I was like, I want to be a professional wrestler or a baseball player. I was always, I just loved it as a kid growing up. I like that, good versus evil, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. I'm from that, that time frame. So, when I graduated from college at Kennesaw State, played baseball there, I got kind of fortunate that I had what's called a free agent tryout. It wasn't drafted or anything like that, but there was they would do some what they call free agent camps, where they invite some people in and had a chance for that. It didn't work out. So I was kind of bummed. I was thinking, oh, there's that one out of the way. And then ran into some guys I grew up with who had entered into the world of professional wrestling. And, now just to put it in context, I'm about 6'2", and then I was about 170 pounds, and 6'2", 170 pounds isn't going to cut it in the world of professional wrestling. So they were, about my height, maybe a little taller, 200 plus pounds. And they were encouraging me, yeah, you can do it. The TV's going to add 10 pounds to you. And, they'll be able to get you up to, and I was like, oh, sure. And then, so next thing you know, they were introducing me to some folks, and it was a little bit more of a closed business, I would say, than it is today. It's sports entertainment. It's a little, of course, more open about being sports entertainment. And but back then it was a little more what I would call a closed business. You kind of had to know someone who knew someone and do the double secret handshake to get in the door and all that. So I ended up meeting someone. And he said, hey, come up on a Saturday. Well, it was up near Rome, Georgia, and do like what they call a tryout. So I was so excited. I thought I was going to be able to do all these cool moves and everything. And literally, Doug, I got beat up for free for about an hour and a half. So, it was one of those, I was like, well, just use your athletic ability. Let's get through this. They can't do it forever. And it was over. The guy was like, hey, you know, they forget your name. They call you kid. Hey, kid, you know?
Yeah, it's not
yeah.
necessarily a good sign, but you
Yeah.
kind
And
of,
I was like, me? He's like, yeah, come here. And he's like, you know, hey, I can tell you has some athletic ability. You know, if you can get up to 200 pounds, I'll train you. And I was like, oh, wow. You know, that's kind of what I needed to hear. And that's kind of how I've been throughout my whole life, Doug. It's just like, and I hopefully I can get that across to folks too, is if you can just get that door to crack, you know, just give me a chance somewhere, you know.
yeah, that chance for opportunity.
Exactly. And that's all I'm asking for. And so, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Dumb and Dumber before or not, but I felt like that when he was asking, you know, Jim Carrey was asking Lauren Holly's character out on a date, and she said the chances were 1 in a million. He's like, so I've got a chance, you know? And so I went back and really put in the work. A friend of mine who I'd grown up with, his parents owned a fitness center in the area, a local fitness center. He was a competitive bodybuilder, and he really helped me a lot getting, you know, start training the right way, nutrition, and got the weight on, and, you know, made sure I was at 205. So just in case they actually weighed me or something. So, and then I called him, and, you know, he kept his word and trained me. And, you know, a few months later, next thing I know, I'm sitting in a Fox affiliated studio in Chattanooga, Tennessee for getting ready to do some promos and all that to start the journey. And that's kind of where it started. And, it probably lasted for about maybe 6 years or so, I'd say, till my body said, no, we can't do this anymore. But
well,
yeah,
it's a demanding career, obviously. And I know the time frame that you wrestled in from the late 80s to mid 90s, if I'm correct. And
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And you probably, as a child, you grew up watching Georgia Championship Wrestling and the Road Warriors and different like WWF and the Georgia with Gordon, all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So it was in your DNA. And obviously baseball. Preparation meets action, luck and timing. If you didn't run across your friends and you weren't in that athletic mindset, that opportunity wouldn't have happened. So, you know,
I totally agree with you, Doug. And I think that's a lot of what it, again, I think it's that, it's all timing. You know, everything is really about timing. We've seen in our lives, and I've noticed that in being in the right place, having faith, and the good Lord looking after you as well through these things. And I totally agree. I mean, if I hadn't ran into them, you know, who knows where that turn may or may not have taken, and, it was great. I can't complain. I'd do it all over. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got to do a lot of things that, Wes Rhea didn't get a chance, wouldn't have been able to do as Wes Rhea, right?
But I mean, Chris Blade could.
Yeah, exactly. You got a persona. and I really enjoyed the giving back again and the helping. I got a chance to go and do some charity work and things of that nature. And that was very rewarding. So I remember as a kid, again, as you just mentioned, I watched a lot of these guys, and also now I'm out there with them, and that was cool,
I think it was an awesome experience, not to cut you off, but graduating college, and we're going to get into that, from Kennesaw State, and then you go into the wrestling thing. And now, as I alluded to in the beginning of the call, Wes has a lot of degrees. It's Juris Doctor, law, MBA, BA degree, educator, compliance, hold numerous titles, and I'm very, very impressive. But when you start off with the wrestling thing, I don't say thing, the wrestling career. Let me be not shortchange it. I don't want to get hit from the top rope. But the point is, those were all transferable skills to your next career. If you fall back in it, maybe you didn't know that at the time, but you're speaking in front of the audience, you're entertaining, you're going through getting your body in shape. These are all things that could lead you to, I don't know, handling hostile phone calls in a customer service setting, which you transition to afterwards.
Doug, you hit it right on the head, my friend. And that is exactly right. And didn't know it at the time, because I'm in my, mid 20s, and, gosh, you don't what you're doing in your mid 20s. But I was learning skills as a professional wrestler that I was able to transition. And when I had to start kind of, went from being in front of, thousands of folks, being on TV, now I'm at customer service, and, I wouldn't trade it because it was a great starting point for me. And you're right. Customer service, anybody that's ever worked customer service, people don't call you up just to tell you how great a job you're doing. They usually have a problem. So, I've probably been yelled at more in customer service than I did as a professional wrestler, that kind of thing. So it gave me, I was prepared. It prepared me, even though I didn't know it at the time, right? But it was preparing me for those things. And again, as you can kind of see, it was still helping people. And I kind of gravitate towards that. I think that's, again, what I loved about teaching. I loved helping students. I loved helping them when, maybe if they just got something out of it, it helped them in their career. But yeah, that's what I really hope people can not only get out if I, in my speaking opportunities, but in my book as well, as that you have skills and don't, and I think people sometimes just got to, depending on your situation, everybody's different, right? And what's going on. But, you have skills that might allow you to step out and try something a little different than what you do, because we've all gained them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely well documented throughout the book about you wanting to help people and wanting servant leadership and wanting to help. But you're in a situation in customer service. You talk about the story. And again, you've got to get a copy of the book. I'm going to disclose everything in the book. But, you're doing customer service. And then, you get into some form of testing and software. So, okay, a little feather in my cap. Now I know a little bit more of the technical IT side. All of this has been set up, but you had the fortitude to ask, to raise your hand up, internal networking, informational interviews, as you say it throughout the book, to set yourself up for the next opportunity. You probably didn't realize it, but now it's well documented. It led to something else.
No, you're exactly right. And I didn't. And I'd love to be able to tell people I had this master plan and I had it, and I didn't, and again, that's where I say faith and a little bit of luck, right? Having the right time and that sort of thing. But, and something I think that I used to try to share with folks and share with students as well is, like, when I started customer service, I got a chance to be with a very large company in the telecommunications industry. It's not around anymore. It was called GTE, and they were a big telecommunication company. They ended up being acquired by, and ended up becoming Verizon, right?
Right.
And what I found, Doug, was when you're in a large company like that, starting out in customer service, and I think this still holds true today, was they liked hiring from within. So what I started doing there, I started working with other departments. And then when an opening would come up, you already had those relationships or the connections. And they were like, oh yeah, Wes is a good guy. We worked well with him. And it's like, and I think that's what I try to get across to folks is sometimes, especially if depending on where you are in your career, where you may have to take a step backwards, but that might get you in the door somewhere that might lead to a step forward. I know nobody likes to take that step backwards. I get it, but I think getting in the door with a large company really helped me because it allowed me to maneuver, in the company because you already had those relationships built in. I got a chance to get it because I still believe I would not have been able to get into quality assurance software testing outside of GTE because I didn't have any of that really background.
Sure.
So I had the connections and the relationships, and they knew I was doing some kind of soft testing because of what I did with the customer service. So they already knew me and knew I could. And so that allowed me to gain that skill internally. And sometimes that's how things end up working, right?
I love that from that journey standpoint, but you always had a presence of mind, and I'll use the word mind, is to get advanced degrees, to continue education, because you springboard that in a sense to, okay, I've done the customer service route. Then you started getting, I believe you obviously you went to school and you got your MBA, and then somehow you made a pivot in finance or healthcare. And I know you're in that space now, and compliance, whether it's corporate compliance officer or chief compliance officer, which I really don't know the difference between the two, but I know it's important. You're at executive level, but
just the title thing.
you transition to that by your journey and the importance of school. But you can have the degree, you can have the experience, but you still got to know people.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important. I'll just tell you real quick, an interesting little story there, Doug, and again, it's all, the timing, right? The timing's everything. Sometimes the timing's on, sometimes it's off, right? But just like I had been in, like after I got out of wrestling, I'd been in telecommunications pretty much my whole career after that. And I enjoyed telecommunications, it was one of those things that, it's going to be around. And I had actually, right as we got close to that late 90s timeframe, I had actually had an opportunity to go work for another telecommunication company. And out of the blue, a good friend of mine who I used to work with called me and said, hey, there's this, I know this recruiter and they're looking for, quality assurance was what I was doing. And it's with a healthcare company. And I was like, I've never been in healthcare, but one thing I learned about technology, and again, I try to let people know about this in the book, is that the skills there are very transferable. You can go to work for just about anybody. Technology, for the most part, technology, right? And testing is kind of testing. So, and I said, well, I told him, I said, well, hey, I got this opportunity for another company. He told me what it paid. And I was like, well, okay, well, I'll go interview with them. What the heck, right? And then they offered me the job. So I ended up going in that direction, which then is what led to then all of a sudden HIPAA coming around, which I know that's not a fun topic for a lot of people, but that's what then allowed me to get into compliance. And so, it's just, and I didn't plan it. I'd love to be able to tell people, hey, I've got this step by step and I can tell you how to get exact, I'd be like, like a Tony Robbins or a, late night, TV infomercial or something, right? But things just happen like that. But I think the having the information technology background helped me tremendously in compliance, because technology is so embedded in understanding that. I think that's what's helped me. And then when I went back and got my law degree, it kind of just tied them all,
But and I like what you said there. You were pretty humble about that, where it just didn't fall in, or you didn't have the master plan. But while you were doing this through your career journey, and it's throughout the book as well, is you've always made steps. You furthered your education. You went to the BA, to the MBA. You got a law degree later in your years, and you're not going to practice maybe as a lawyer,
right?
But that law degree helped you with the compliance, right? If you didn't have that, it wouldn't have tied together. So there's a quote in the book, and you can say it better, well, why not have a law degree at this age, or something that affects us? Why are you doing this at this point in your life? Well, you can at least say you had the degree, but no, there's a little more. You actually could leverage that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And what was there interesting? I've been very blessed, Doug, to have some very good, what I would call mentors along the way.
I wanted to get into that, mentors and leadership.
And one thing is, when I just, when I was doing the compliance work, I was very fortunate to work for a legal counsel at a healthcare company I was working at the time, and I was doing compliance, and I always had an interest in law. So I worked in the legal department. So I was always around attorneys, and I learned a lot from them. And also what I picked up on too, Doug, was that they went to law school to be attorneys to do things like mergers and acquisitions, or trial, or litigation, or contract, or negotiate. Yeah. They didn't really go to be a compliance officer. So they loved me because I did that work. And then if I ran up on something that was a little out of I could, come bounce it off them. And so we were having a conversation, and he said to me, if you go back and get your law degree, you're really going to round yourself out. And I was like, kind of, trying to get the excuse of, hey, I'm at this age right now in my life. I'm, a lot of going on. And he was like, you don't have to become a practicing attorney, but it's going to help you and make you very marketable. And, I kept him on. He said, well, how old are you going to be in 3 years? And I told him, and he said, well, either you're going to be that age with a law degree or without a law degree. So
that's the quote I was looking for. Yeah.
So
I love that.
So he kind of got me there. So I started looking over some programs that made sense, and bounced it off him. And he was like, yeah, this is going to be perfect, and this will put you in a good shape. And it did. It made me very marketable, because what I found is compliance officers, sometimes they are practicing attorneys, and sometimes they aren't. And I've noticed that having the JD does seem to help me, because they know I kind of had that understanding of the law and that sort of thing, which has been good. And I have to say, Doug, when I went back and got my MBA, and I wouldn't maybe necessarily recommend this to everybody, but I got it, almost 10 years after I graduated from my undergrad, my MBA, and it made sense to me, because I was working at the time and I enjoyed it. And then when I went back and got my law degree, again, same thing, when life's happening and everything's going on and you're working, trying to go to school, but the law degree really made a lot of sense to me because of what I was doing from a compliance perspective, and so it wasn't just, go straight from undergrad to keeping all the book knowledge. I had some practical knowledge around it as well, which really helped. But, at the time I was wondering, what have I gotten myself into? But, it worked out.
No, but the timing for the education made sense, because, while you've had a lot of luck, or a lot of things happen to you in journey, I mean, I'd say luck, but You're obviously from the wrestling to professional wrestling to information technology to customer service, and then healthcare compliance, which I believe you're doing right now.
Yeah.
We'll definitely hone in on what you're currently doing and what we're working. We'll wrap that up later. I'm teasing the audience on that because he's still doing great things. Then, graduate of Kennesaw State, it goes full circle. You got the calling. Do you want to teach? And that's in the book. And I love this because you're like collegiate level at Kennesaw State, where you actually were a student. Wes comes home to teach. But you were somewhat effort. You like to help people, obviously. But you said at one point you were a little nervous about it. And then you go, well, you know what? I've been booed in different cities throughout the Southeast as a wrestler, and I've been hung up in customer service. You got this. So talk a little bit about the pivot to being an educator. And you started out not just as a professor, you had to work your way up that way as well, and interview within Kennesaw State.
Yeah, no, really, thank you for that, Doug. And it's again just interesting how those things kind of come about. And just to share a really quick story on that, how that all kind of transitioned was, I had thought I had my dream job many years ago as a CIO before I started really focusing on compliance, and it was with a financial company. And unfortunately, it's like, again, this time it was a little bit bad timing because it was around that time when just things weren't going well, and they got acquired, and had a lot of duplications of efforts and things of that nature. But I had previously started back a relationship with Kennesaw State on doing an intern program. So I was getting students from interns to help get them going. So I had that relationship. And when that kind of came, I said, well, you know what? I used to go guest speak, and I enjoyed it. And I reached out to a couple of professors there, had relationships with. They were like, hey, there's always opportunities for what they called adjunct professors. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And all of a sudden I got a call, and it was a Saturday class at 11 in the morning,
Right.
And it was, by the way, it's going to be happening in 2 weeks. Here's a book.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Here's a book, some PowerPoints. And I was like, and then, but yeah, and that kind of just stopped for me. I said, okay, you've been in front of people, like you mentioned, customer service, all these other things. So that then all of a sudden it ended up turning into something more. And I'll have to say something, really a funny story was when I started interviewing there. There was actually an accounting professor who I had as a student, and she was still there. And at the time, of course, she didn't remember me, but I remembered her because I thought she was just a great professor. I'll never forget, I just loved her as a professor. And she was part of the interview process. And after we got done, I went over and talked to her, and I said, you may not remember me. I was in your class. I really enjoyed you as an accounting professor. And I said, I had a really hard time calling you by your first name. You were, you're Professor, Morris to me. And she started laughing and got a kick out of that. But, it's just, again, those connections and the coming to full circle. And it was really, great school. And it's been great to see the school grow and, watch the sports programs really take off, and just, it's a good group, just such a great group of kids over there and students, and watching them. And I think just having that opportunity to, hopefully bring a little something to the table for them that said, hey, I've been out here. I can tell you what's hot, what's going on, what are the fields, and, that kind of thing. And just always enjoyed that, Doug. So it was fun coming back, kind of coming back somewhat. Somebody asked me and said, if you'd ever thought you would teach, I said, I think at the time I said, well, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have laughed, said no, but then here it was. So that's why I always try to tell people, never say no to stuff. Don't close doors, keep those connections, because you just never know when something might come about, and again, going back and getting my MBA was critical, because that's what allowed me to teach. Because at the minimum, you do have to have a master's degree. And, I could have, if I hadn't done that, then I never would have been able to, and so again, little stepping stones that I just didn't see at the time, but good Lord was looking after me.
No. And on that, because obviously you put yourself out through your education in your different jobs at all levels, and they've all was documented in the book, all these transferable skills, being a communicator in customer service in your earlier years, wrestling, and being able to have the mic speak and work a ring, and being able to perform on stage, and then being able to leverage that to the next level as an educator, teaching in front of a classroom or working a boardroom. All these talents go somewhere, but you've always had the fortitude to educate and inspire, but you've always internalized and networked. You know, you can
Yes.
sit in a chair or in a role, and that's great. I'm here, but you raised your hand and say, hey, I'm kind of curious about what you do. And you talked about some of these lessons here in the book. We can
Yeah.
get into the acronym if we got time, work, but you also talk about doing, you know, informational interviews, internal interviews,
Yeah.
the power of a thank you letter, all
Yeah.
these things. So if you're in career transition or you're looking to understand your life's journey when it comes to transformation skills, this is the book. So
Well,
would you mind spending a little bit of time talking about some of these lessons, quick hits like
yeah.
work is and all that? And I know get
Yeah.
the book, people, but
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I appreciate that. Yeah, and you know that, and I like kind of acronyms. That was why I kind of had to learn some things along the way. I put it in an acronym and help me remember something, you know. But yeah, you know, and that's why I try to tell people is, like where do you want to be? You know, like work. Where do you want to be? I think trying to focus and where you're wanting to go and where are those opportunities, right? I think sometimes people take there's all different ways, and I don't have the perfect solution. I'm just saying,
sure,
I just like to tell people, kind of what I think worked for me. And if it helps them, then hopefully that's what it'll do is it, where do you want to be? What are those opportunities? Like when I would tell students, I would say, hey, right now the opportunities are in technology, information security, accounting, education, nursing. If you have any passion at all for any of those, those degrees are going to set you up when you get ready to graduate. Because I would see students with IT degrees, for instance, and not cybersecurity degrees, and they were already, they had a job offer by their, before the second or two semesters before they're ready to graduate, right?
right,
So and then I talk about resilience. I think you have to be resilient, and I think I learned a lot of that from playing sports, where you're going to have some great games and then you're not going to have some great games, and if you let them, you can't get the highs too high and the lows too low, so I thought that was. And then knowledge, I think again, just what is it? Is it going back and getting degrees, or could it be certifications, right? Sometimes a certification can be just as valuable. And the thing now is, Doug, it's so convenient to learn. And now not every, and I have to say, I kind of like being in a classroom. It's a little bit more, I'm a little old school there, but I've done a lot of online work and online teaching or online studying and teaching as well. But there's so many ways to gain knowledge and from very low cost to depending on how much you want to spend. So, and what I tell some people is, wherever you're working, if your company offers tuition reimbursement, take advantage of that.
sure.
And help let them, help flip the bill for a little of that. But I think that's what I tried to get across is just, where do you want to be? What are the opportunities? Be resilient as you're going through it. As going through job interviews and job training, there's going to be some interviews where you think, oh, I've got this, and then you never hear back from anybody, right?
Right.
And then there's times where you're like, oh man, I really messed that one up. And then you get a call back, right? So, you just got to be able to take that and then just always keep learning, keep learning, whatever is going to help you try to get yourself in a position where nobody can come back and say, okay, you're covering about 90% of these bullet points on the job description, right?
Right.
Yes. So that's what I really try to get across, and hopefully that helps somebody in their journey, whatever makes sense to them,
No,
however they do that.
I love the acronym, and I'll just summarize it in layman's terms: work, where you're at, O for opportunity, R for resilience, and K for knowledge.
Yes.
And speaking of knowledge, throughout the book, Wes obviously shares a lot of stories, as you can tell in the interview. He's not short on stories, but throughout the book, you have these stories of your journey,
Mm-hmm.
but you also bring to the reader other stories that resonate from other professional athletes, people in general, philosophers, and there's verses in here as well. So there's all kinds of information. So you're sharing your story, but you're also taking a quote or two or a story from somebody else that resonates to it. I like that. I like learning, going down the path of some of the baseball stories or hearing about other things that apply to what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Doug. And that's what I really tried to, I felt like maybe that might resonate with some folks. And it wasn't getting all about me, but I think when they hear about somebody else who's had a story, whether, it was, you know, I try not to, I'm a huge Georgia Bulldog fan. I try not to let that get too much in there, but, you know, again, like a kid like Stetson Bennett and what he went through, and, you know, and I know as an athlete, when you make that one mistake in a critical game and you're thinking, oh God, did I just cost us that?
Right.
And
But there's a lesson to be learned.
and he had
Yeah,
the fortitude to said, you know, this ain't defining me. You know, that's not how it goes, you know, and that kind of stuff is cool. Or Sarah Blakely, you know, who comes up with a Spanx, you know, and comes up with an idea that she didn't want to share with other people because it wasn't that she was afraid of someone stealing her idea. She didn't want somebody telling her, hey, you can't do this, or, you know, there's so many hosiery products out there. And she stuck with it, right? And look at where she did. You know, she sold it off, and she's unbelievable. You know, so I love those kind of, you know, seeing people who go through those things, whether it's athletes, a Zamir White, you know, going through what he did, and, you know, where, you know, those sort of things, and the perseverance, or a Sarah Blakely or a Stetson Bennett, or, you know, it's about their story too. And that, you know, I think really showing that perseverance and hard work and not giving up, you know, I think that's the key. And, you know, at some point, you got to say, okay, you know, it's time, or but
sure.
you know, I think that's where you see people like that. I just kind of wanted to share those, because those resonated with me, and wanted to share those with some other folks too, to hopefully know that that's how they're, you know, how their story, and you can do it too, you know.
I loved it because it was throughout the book. So I was like reading your journey, but then you were putting other people's stories in there. One of the stories that I got to get the answer to now that I have you on. And you kind of left us hanging, the reader. I get the whole, you're working out in the gym with one of your good friends, younger years, right after wrestling, bobsled thing. So you did that. So you trained for it. You went to Lake Placid, and I get the whole journey about how you had to take a limousine ride and all that. I got that. But you never let us know what exactly happened at the trials.
Yeah,
is that in book 2? Is that coming out in another book?
No.
Or is this top secret? Because I'm like, okay, he's at Lake Placid. I get it. I'm related. I'm a sports guy. I don't think he made the Olympic team, but
no.
I don't even know if he made it to the tryout. So
I made it. Yeah, I don't know if another book's in the works, Doug, but we'll see. But yeah, I made it to the tryout. So after all that little journey there of getting, again, of all the places, you know, the limousine driver for Shania Twain happens to be in the parking lot. And that's how one time in my life I had to hitch a ride. That was it. So that's not too bad of a hitch of a ride there, getting that limousine. But yeah, I did make it to the tryout and the trials. You know, no, it didn't pan out, which again, you know, sometimes those things happen, but it was a great experience to be able to go up there and kind of go through that. I was, you know, it would have been, I wish I would have probably picked up on that sport a little earlier.
It's almost like your buddy said, hey, let's do this. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the way I've always kind of been, Doug. You know, I've always been one of those, and I think I talk a little bit about that in the book as well. I try my best not to, I don't want to look back. Like, you know, that's why when I did the wrestling thing, I got in there, and I remember that very first match, I was like, you know what, if this goes nowhere else, you did it. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't, when you're 60 or 70 years old, you won't have to say, well, I could have been, you know, I could have been. Same thing with that. I didn't, you know, honestly, I didn't think there would probably be a shot that I would actually make the Olympic team. But I said, well, you know, you never know. I'm maybe just as athletic as everybody else, and, you know, we'll see where it goes. But, you know, it didn't pan out, but it was, again, great experience. And I, again, wouldn't trade it. But I wish, again, if I'd have had a little more runway where I might have picked that up a few years earlier, I think I could have had a little more opportunity to get maybe a little bit better prepared for it. But, you know, it was a great experience, and to be able to be somebody that's asked to go up there was cool. You know, that was really cool.
That's an amazing story. And within a story, there are so many stories like in this book, and I enjoyed it from a corporate business perspective as I'm going through transition and looking for opportunities. But as a sports fan, as a youth, I played sports. I can identify with what you're doing. So for me, you know, relatively close to the same age, there's a lot of things that I identify with. But if you're, I guess my point is, if you're 14 years old or 94 years old, there's something in this book that you can gravitate, because it's about transformation, transferable skills, and telling journeys. And I do like you have the Bible verses in here, because faith is a big big part
Yeah.
of you
Yeah.
and what you speak to as well.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. No, Doug, really appreciate that a lot. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just taking those skills you've learned along the way. And I think just being, sometimes you got to get out of that old saying, your comfort zone a little bit sometimes. And you just never know what may happen, and again, having, timing, faith, a little bit of luck, all those things. Like I said, I have to be honest, when I landed there in Lake Placid and all of a sudden realized that for the most part, the airport was closed. And, this was way before the days of Uber and all these other things, right? I was like, uh-oh,
They're going to stay the night in the airport.
I'm like, uh-oh, and of all the people to be, just dropped off at this. I mean, the airport's not huge by no means, it's nowhere near. And just I was like, a limousine, that's interesting at this time of night. I'll just gonna follow this guy and see where it goes. But yeah, it's just, I think and as you mentioned earlier on to the networking is so important, just having those connections, knowing the people and getting yourself in the best position you can be. And that's why I'd say, whether it's education, certifications, look at, I try to tell a lot of people, look at job descriptions that you're wanting to apply for. And, what can you do to put yourself in the best position where they can't say no to Doug, right? Okay, Doug's got this, he's got this, he's got this, right? So that's what I always try to tell people. If you want to be a project manager, you probably need to get your PMP, your project management professional certification, because most job descriptions are going to either say PMP required, or if they say preferred, they probably really are meaning required, so it's just, put yourself in that position and don't get filtered out, So
yeah, and exactly. I mean, that the whole book's a journey here. From writing this book, it's been out, like I said, almost 2 years. Just what did you learn from this author journey of writing this book? Is there any stories that you've got out of this, or what would you do differently? Or if you were writing another book, just share the mindset of an author right now. What do you feel about the book journey?
Yeah, no, it was very, it was very rewarding. I mean, it was nice too to be able to kind of get to be able to do that. And there were times where I couldn't think of a thing to write, and then there'd be some times where I was just, the keyboard with smoke was coming off the keyboard, right? But it was very very rewarding. It felt good. It does take time, and I think I said in the book, I tip my hat, to these folks who do write books for a living. I don't think I could do that. But it was something I'd always wanted to do, Doug, and I just didn't know what at the time when I was thinking about. And then just so happened that this seemed to be the right timing for it because of what I was trying to do and help people. And I got the right publisher who was interested in the story. And they were like, hey, we want you to put it we want it to be your voice, your terms, or what we're going to do from an editing perspective is just going to make sure you don't miss something grammatically or something like that. Right. So, cause I don't know about you, but sometimes my brain gets ahead of my keyboard, and I'll go back and read it and go, that doesn't make sense. But at the time it did, right? So they were very supportive and have been very supportive of the whole journey, which has been very helpful. Had a great relationship there with them, and it's just been so. We'll see. I don't know again if I'll do another one or not. This was kind of one of those I just wanted to make sure. It was definitely a bucket list item, but we'll see. Who knows?
Well,
it was fun.
One thing about the book, and I'll just speak from my perspective in layman's terms, is the concept of the book. If you're looking to hire a speaker, or if you need an inspirational read that can help people, this is a good read. And obviously you can pick it up I'll let you do the book promotion, but we'll put up information on the screen as well. But how can somebody get a copy of the book? I'm teeing it up for you.
Yeah,
I'm your tag team partner. I'm throwing it back to you. So how can somebody get this book here, off the top rope?
Yeah, tag you in, Doug. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble, all the Barnes and Nobles carry it. Of course, Amazon carries it. Books A Million. But pretty much, I've always wanted to say this. Pretty much anybody that carries a book, so you can buy it wherever people like buying a book. And then I have a website too, where people can go to and see some of the things I've done, some other things, and some of my events coming up, and then listen to podcasts and things of that nature. And then it also has 2 links on there too. One goes to Amazon, one goes to Barnes and Noble, and then a Trilogy Publishing. You can go straight to Trilogy Publishing as well too, and you can go to the links from there too. But just pretty out anywhere you can buy a book. It's pretty much available, which has been really nice. And it of course varies depending on where you're purchasing it from and that sort of thing. But yeah, Barnes and Noble has been great. They've had a chance to do a lot of book signings with them. They've been great, and so has a lot of the independent bookstores have been really good. One local here in the area called the Book Exchange, and then the Crazy Book Lady. I'll give them both a little shout. They've been really great supporters too from that side, and it's just been a good journey and been fun to meet people, and you just never know who you might meet or help along the way, which has been fun. So that's what it's all about. I've been trying to help out the Make-A-Wish Georgia folks, and then when I go to Tennessee and do a book signing, I'll try to help out the Make-A-Wish Tennessee folks there as well. I did it in North Carolina too. So I like trying to help some of those folks out where I can in places too.
Well, you can go, obviously we'll put a link up to the website. So you can go to the website for more information on the book and what you're working on for book signing. So we'll plug that as well, right? Off the Top Rope, the website.
Yes, sir. It is offthetopropebook.com. So offthetopropebook.com.
And you know what? And that comes from the wrestling and the book perspective and life's journey. You can also reach out to Wes on the corporate side, probably through LinkedIn, correct? So we'll
you get LinkedIn.
So we're going to put the best of all worlds.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me out on any of those. And anybody always feel free to connect with me. I'd love connecting with people. And if there's any way I can do to help, I'm happy to help any way I can. And I'll get back to you for sure. I'll make sure that when people reach out to me, I always get back. So that was something that I've always, tried to do. May not get right back immediately, but I will get back. So,
I'll say he does from the standpoint. I can sum this whole interview up before we wrap. Is that, it's a journey of networking and connecting. Full disclosure, it was 2 months ago. I saw Wes speak in action, helping out career coaching and people in career transition. So I said, hey, I like this guy. And I'm in the audience, popping my head in there. And you were speaking. And I said, well, I'll just send him a LinkedIn invite. Hit me. He responded, and he looked at my profile. I said, you do a little bit with video and stuff. And I said, yes, I do. And I said, well, let's do a video interview. Let's talk about your book, and let's talk about some other things. So, you know what? If I didn't step up in the room and network and you didn't follow up, probably wouldn't be doing this today.
Exactly. No, and I can't thank you enough for this. And as you talk about, we're going to definitely get some other things going to try to get some of these other videos going and get some of the word out too. But no, you've been great, and I really appreciate you doing this with me, Doug. It's been great, and I can't thank you enough for it.
You got it. And speaking of thank you, always use thank you.
You got
notes when you're interviewing. So before we wrap, finally, Wes, I know you've got a full day.
It's okay
in the compliance world.
Yep.
And is there any questions for me, or better yet, is there anything else that we didn't cover that your parting shot? I'll let it go 2 ways. Ask me, or do you have a parting shot?
Well, no, again, I just can't thank you enough for this, for your time on this, Doug. And, you've done a great job covering this. I think the biggest thing I would just leave with people is, just take the skills you've learned over the years, take them, see where you can improve, advance them, whatever that case may be, certifications, going back a little more education, training, whatever that can. Make sure you're networking with people, get out there and help some, and pay it back, pay it forward, so to speak. Help people. If somebody's helping you, pay it forward. And the last thing I always like to try to tell people is be the reason someone smiles today. Try to be that reason, for someone. Yeah.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege. I look forward to more interviews and more content. If you're out there, check out what Wes is doing, both on LinkedIn on the corporate side, and go to his website to get a copy of this book. If you're looking to be inspired, you're looking to help people, you're looking about your career journey, whether it's transferable, transformational skills, It's all highlighted throughout the book, and there's a lot of great stories in here. I'm Doug, breaking it down in layman's terms. Thank you so much, Wes, for coming on.
Thank
and
you,
I
Doug.
look forward to more endeavors with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.